Using Cars 3 to teach your kids about gender equality. It can be done. Hi everyone, my name is Chris and welcome to Tread Talks, where I walk on this treadmill to stay in shape while making videos for you fine people. The Cars franchise hasn't had the greatest track record when it comes to its representation of women. The first two films feature female characters that are, at best, defined by their connection to their male counterparts, and at worst defined by being twin groupies that flash their headlights at Lightning McQueen. And with Cars 3, I recognize that it's still not an ideal film to go to for female representation. The story still centers around Lightning McQueen, and Cruz Ramirez only comes into her own because McQueen allows for it to happen. But at the same time, I was surprised to see elements that go in the other direction. Elements that I think make for some really good and positive conversations about feminism, especially with my young boys. And so here's how I'm using Cars 3 to teach boys about gender equality. To start with, I'm highlighting the interesting diversity of women in the film. Thankfully, we're well beyond the representation of the Mia and Tia variety, and instead we're given a decent diversity of female characters. There's Miss Fritter, the long-standing demolition derby champion, voiced by Lea DeLaria. There's Natalie Certain, the lead statistician on Chick Hicks' show, voiced by Kerry Washington. And there's Louise Nash, the first female racer, voiced by Margot Martindale. And of course you have Cruz Ramirez, Lightning McQueen's trainer, and ultimately his successor, voiced by Cristela Alonzo. It's great to see a wider array of both characters and voice actors in the film. Second, I'm using it to introduce real trailblazing women that broke into male-dominated fields. There are several story elements here that I think are good launching points for kids to begin to understand where we've been on the road to gender equality. For example, when Cruz and Lightning meet those older generation racers for the first time, we see that Cruz already knows all about Louise Nash, and that she's fascinated by her because of the trail she blazed in racing. And then we actually get to hear explicitly Louise's story about how she had to steal a number to get into her first race. And so this is a world, much like ours, in which those explicit barriers to entry were real. Lots of great conversations can come from that scene. We can talk about why Cruz was so excited to meet Louise. We can talk about how Louise Nash was based on real-life racer Louise Smith, who has her own interesting first race story. And we can look at other fields where real women have had to break through systemic barriers and how they continue to do so today. Third, I'm using the film to show that barriers still exist and to explain the concept of privilege. The story shows us that despite the work of Louise Nash, there are barriers that are still very real for Cruz Ramirez, even though there aren't any official rules barring women from racing. We see this play out when we learn for the first time that Cruz more than anything wants to be a racer, but that when she got to the starting line for her first race, she realized that she could, quote, never be one of them. And it's not explicitly stated why she feels this way, but one blatantly apparent reason is that she's a woman entering into a still male-dominated sport. There's a distinction between her and everyone else. And this is the insecurity that Jackson Storm taps into during the final race when he tells her that she'll, quote, never be a racer. And on top of that, the movie presents a decent and subtle example of the concept of privilege. When we have Cruz Ramirez sharing about her insecurities in that first race, it quickly becomes clear that Lightning McQueen enjoyed a certain confidence that she did not. Both were super fast racers, both faster than anyone around them. Both of them were theoretically capable of winning that first race. And yet Cruz Ramirez shares how unsure she was that success was even possible. And she asks Lightning McQueen how he could be so sure of himself. And Lightning's reply says so much. He says that he never thought that he couldn't succeed. So whereas for Lightning McQueen success was always a possibility, for Cruz Ramirez the possibility seemed remote or perhaps even unattainable. And this is the kind of psychological advantage or privilege that someone who fits in can have, because they see themselves as being like those who have succeeded in the past, or as being like those who are competing currently. And so they're more likely to have the confidence to try because they're more likely to see success as something that's possible for themselves. And so for me and my boys, I'm going to start by asking them why they think that Cruz felt like she couldn't really fit in. And then from there we can talk about some of the reasons why Lightning was able to be so confident while Cruz Ramirez wasn't. And hopefully that can lead to an understanding of how it can feel for someone when they're different than the rest of the group. Because building the capacity for empathy, I think, is always a great next step. And finally, I'm going to use what happens in the final race to show how it's great to lift others up. In the last race of the film, we have McQueen finally realizing that he can give Cruz the kind of opportunity that she deserves by giving up his own spot in the race. This is a great example for this up-and-coming generation of boys. Young boys who will inevitably still find themselves often in positions of power or in situations in which they are a part of the in-group. And I appreciate two things about how this plays out in the movie. The first is that it comes at a personal cost to McQueen himself. He never gets a chance to directly put Jackson Storm in his place. He never gets his personal revenge. And I think that's part of making this a great example, because it's one thing to be willing to lift another person up, but it's another thing entirely when you're willing to do so, even if it comes at a personal cost to you. And this is the kind of care and compassion for others that I hope my children grow to embody. But second, and more importantly, we see that Lightning sees this sacrifice as being good and joyful and meaningful. The idea started back when he learned that Doc Hudson thought that the real joy in his life came from training him. And then it becomes crystal clear when he realizes that his own life is now supposed to be about doing the same thing for someone else. And how great is it to have an example of a hero that gives up their own prestige to help someone else get a leg up, and to have that hero see that sacrifice as a joyful experience. I think it's great. So although Cars 3 isn't a movie like Inside Out or Brave in terms of presenting a clearly female-focused story, I do think it has a positive role to play in introducing gender equality to our kids. The story of Louise Nash can prompt us to share about real systemic barriers that real women have to break through. The story of Cruz Ramirez can help us encourage empathy and compassion for those that aren't a part of the in-group. And finally, the choice that Lightning makes at the end of the film to use his own power and prestige to help lift someone else up, that's something we can totally use to encourage our kids to do likewise. There's a lot of great stuff to work with here. But what do you think? Do you agree? Am I giving the film too much credit? Am I completely off in some way that I'm not realizing? Whatever it is, leave it in the comments and I'll take a look. And if you like this video and you want to keep up with my content, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and it would be great if you were a part of that group. And hit the little bell icon to be notified when a new video goes up. Either way, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.